Hey guys, what's going on? This is going to be my breakdown for week 0 or week 1. I'm not sure what we're calling it. I like to go with week 1, but I see some people calling it week 0 out there. So I'm going to break it down. We do have a Thursday night slate on DraftKings, so that's what the initial pricing I'm going to show here is for you. So we have 2 games on Thursday night, and this is only offered on DraftKings. The Saturday night FanDuel also has a slate, so those are the pricings I'm going to go, but I'll go over that once we get there. So the first game we have is Central Arkansas at UAB. Central Arkansas is an FCS squad. You're not going to want much ownership. Maybe as a one-off, their quarterback is very cheap. He could give you some leverage, but I don't know if it's worth it. Braylon Smith at 5,200. He's a mobile quarterback, so maybe if he gets a rushing touchdown, he could return some value and give you leverage. Other than that, their 2 receivers as a one-off is the only thing I would consider. UAB is one of the best group of 5 squads out there, and they're extremely solid defensively, both up front and in the secondary. They have 4 All-Conference USA guys in the secondary, so I wouldn't play much against them. I am looking at their players, however. These are all core plays for me. It's unclear whether they're going to get it done through the air, on the ground, or both. It kind of just depends how they're feeling. Tyler Johnson III at quarterback is extremely expensive, but he's probably worth a play at 9,300. Spencer Brown's the all-time leading rusher in school history. I just read that over the offseason he went from 240 pounds to 215 pounds. He dropped some weight, and he was a bit of a plotter before, so that could help him. That might be a good look, and like I said, they're probably going to feed him. They're not going to be shy about giving him carries since he's the all-time leading rusher. Austin Watkins Jr. is a huge wide receiver threat. He averaged 19.6 yards per reception last year. He's a big play waiting to happen. So getting him at 8,000, that's pretty expensive. He didn't have a ton of catches, but he is their top guy. He's their top guy, and he's a huge threat. Austin Peay hit some shots over the top against Central Arkansas last week, and they basically had a punter at quarterback, so imagine what UAB could do here. And then Myron Mitchell, the other wide receiver at 6,000, is another fantastic play. He can go off this year possibly with Kendall Parham, one of their leading receivers from a year ago, graduating. Myron Mitchell's worth a shot. He's also, I believe, their kick returner or punt returner, so he's dynamic with the football, and he can go up and get it. From what I heard the coaches talking about, he's a good wide receiver. A cheap running back here, because I do believe there are some good quarterback and wide receiver options on the slate. Lucius Stanley, the backup running back for UAB, he filled in when Spencer Brown was injured last year, and he performed very well. He almost performed better than Spencer Brown, I believe, on a per snap basis. So getting him at 4,100, he should get a lot of carries, especially if this turns into a blowout, which it very well may be. Lucius Stanley could easily return value at 4,100, so I will definitely have some ownership there as well. The second game of the slate is South Alabama versus Southern Miss. This one's a little bit more evenly matched up. Southern Miss is favored by about 13.5 points last I checked. So Southern Miss is expected to win. I think they probably do win, but I think this could be closer than people are expecting. I do want to get ownership on both sides of this one, actually. Southern Miss has had a lot of players opting out. Jalen Adams, one of their top wide receivers, opted out, and they had some key guys defensively. I know a good linebacker and D lineman opted out, and that puts them down to actually only 4 returning starters defensively. And with this tumultuous offseason, I think their defense might be vulnerable. Usually they have a pretty good defense, but with only 4 returning starters, weird offseason. And then facing South Alabama team who took off under Desmond Trotter the last 4 games of the season. South Alabama is definitely worth the look here. They might keep it very close. South Alabama had one of the worst offenses against FBS squads last year. They were averaging around 11.4 points per game. And then Desmond Trotter took over the last 4 games of the season. They were completely different. They were a completely different team. Trotter had 151 passer rating. He was very dynamic. He can get it done through the feet and through the air. And he has 6 of his top 7 wide receivers returning here. So South Alabama's worth a look. They also, you could stack these quarterbacks if you wanted to. South Alabama's defense isn't terrible, but again, they only won 2 games last year. So you could have interest in both sides, actually. Davis, their running back, he's filling in for Tra Minter, who was a 1,000-yard back. So Davis might have opportunities as well. Like I said, he's playing a banged up, beat up, inexperienced defense. So Davis is definitely worth a look. That's a good price on him. Kawan Baker at 5,500. That's a great play. He gets a little bit more volume than Tolbert. These are the top two wide receivers. Tolbert's a little bit more of a boomer bust guy. Tolbert actually went off for over 40 fantasy points in the last game of the season in 2019 against Arkansas State. He had 4 touchdowns in that game. So he's a boomer bust guy. He's very inefficient, however. He had over 60 targets last year, and I believe he only had 27 catches on the year. So he's inefficient, but he can hit you with that big play. And like I said, with the situation of the defense they're playing, he could hit a few big plays. You could stack them both with Trotter. South Alabama's worth the look either way. I think I'll be slightly more high owned on Baker paired with Trotter, simply because Baker gets a little bit more targets. They also use him out of the backfield. He's kind of a fun wide receiver. So yeah, that's South Alabama. As far as Southern Miss, Jack Abraham is a core play because at 7,000, that's a fantastic price point. He is one of the better group of 5 quarterbacks. However, he does have a huge interception problem. He completes a lot of his passes. He's around 70% completions for his career. But he does throw interceptions. One of the reasons I think his yardage totals were so high last year is that he had NFL wide receiver Quez Watkins. Now with the Philadelphia Eagles, he would take a lot of those passes and he would take them to the house. He's not going to have Quez Watkins and he's not going to have Jalen Adams. He loses 2 very dynamic wide receivers. So we're not sure how he's going to perform here. This is a decent matchup for him. I think he will perform well. He can move a little bit, but just beware. He's dealing with some unfortunate circumstances. So initially I thought I was going to be almost 100% Jack Abraham. Now I'm dipping that down. He's still Abraham, Trotter, and Johnston. I have about equal ownership of. I am using all 3 of them. It just kind of depends on how your stacks are working out. But yeah, I would use all 3 of them. As far as wide receivers with Abraham, I have Tim Jones at 5,300 in nearly every single one of my lineups. He's a target hog, and like I said, their other receivers gone. He's going to get a lot of looks. He's way too cheap. That is a mispricing. As far as Brownlee at 7,000, he's all right as well. Him with an Abraham stack, maybe stacking them with Jones as well is not a bad look. He is a transfer coming in, and that makes me a little nervous. They're talking about he might be the number 1 guy, but we don't know that. We don't know what he's going to bring to the table. He could be boom or bust here. We're not sure what to expect. Tim Jones, at least we know what to expect. He had over 900 yards last year. As far as the running backs, they had a miserable running game last year. It was absolutely miserable. They do return some linemen who were not great from a year ago, but the returning experience is always good in college football. And they have a new offensive coordinator from Louisiana Monroe who's had some great rushing attacks in the past. And it's tough to know what to expect. Like they're saying in the media, they're going to get the run game going. But again, we don't know if that's going to work. They are facing a South Alabama squad that can easily be run on. I believe they were 102 in rush yards allowed last year. So Ragsdale and Frank Gore Jr., there's a name for you. I will have a little bit of both of these guys. Playing them probably without Abraham is not a bad look in case Abraham does struggle, but the running game does get going. Frank Gore Jr. is a pretty good freshman back, and there's been a lot of positive buzz about him, but we don't know how many carries he's going to get, but he's a good punt play for very cheap. And Ragsdale, I don't think will be super high owned. We'll see. But I think it's going to be a little bit of a running back by committee, and there's a chance it also just completely flops. So that's Thursday's slate. There's only those 2 games. I am going to cover Saturday's slate a little bit. The only pricing I have up here, so I'm going to be gone this weekend. I want to get this video out before Thursday's games, but I have built some Saturday lineups as well, but I wasn't able to fully break down the coverage with both with pricing for both slates. So the pricing I have up here is FanDuel, since that was available when I made this video. So I am going to cover Saturday's slate a little bit. Asher O'Hara, he's one of the most dynamic mobile quarterbacks for Middle Tennessee State. I will have some ownership of him on this Saturday slate. I wouldn't have much ownership in his wide receivers because they spread it out. He's most of a rushing guy. Army can be run on, and I think it's going to be Asher O'Hara who's doing the running. As far as Army, Jabari Laws, their new quarterback, he's going to run the ball, and he's going to be fairly low owned. He's a leverage play. There are much better options, but if you're looking for leverage, he's decent. And Sandon McCoy kind of goes in that same line of thinking. He ran for 10 touchdowns a year ago. Army should run all over Middle Tennessee, not exactly blowing them out, but they should control the ball. Middle Tennessee couldn't stop the run at all a year ago. So either one of these guys, or maybe even both of them, could get, a touchdown or two. So they'd be worth a look, but I'm not going to be very heavily owned on this game except for some shares on Asher O'Hara. I can say that Asher O'Hara is very cheap, mispriced on DraftKings. I did take a look. He's 6,200. So he's probably going to be super heavily owned, but it might be worth it to get two good quarterbacks in your lineup there. Get them in the super flex. Eastern Kentucky Marshall. No ownership for Eastern Kentucky. For me, they're if you want to find leverage, maybe go for it. But Marshall's pretty good defensively. I personally wouldn't do it. As far as Marshall, Brendan Knox is the look here. He's pretty expensive on both sites. So on FanDuel, he's 9,700. He's probably going to be pretty chalky. Their backup running back is actually worth a look on both sites. He's very cheap, 6,200 on FanDuel, I believe 4,200 on DraftKings. Usually Marshall. So Brendan Knox is a very good quarterback. He ran for over 1,300 yards from a year ago, and now he's facing an FCS squad. That explains why he's going to be chalky and why he's so high priced and why he's a core play. However, Sheldon Evans is a good pivot. You could possibly stack on both if you want to get a little funky with it. But like I said, Marshall typically gives more than one running back carries. They like to split carries, have a running back by committee. It didn't really work out that way last year due to injuries and whatnot, but I heard the coaches talking about getting Evans more involved in the rushing offense and playing an FCS squad. This one could be a blowout. Evans could have a very decent game for a low price point, almost like Lucius Stanley I mentioned for UAB. As far as these other guys, these are just leverage plays. I'm not a big believer in Marshall's passing offense. They weren't good last year, and now they have, I believe he's a redshirt freshman, 3-star Grant Wells. He might be decent, but he doesn't run the ball. So I'm not very interested in him, but this is a cupcake matchup for him. So he could be very low owned and give you leverage if you wanted to go that route. Xavier Gaines, a tight end, they do some weird things with him. He was a former quarterback, but he's probably touchdown dependent. So maybe a funky leverage play, but I'm not really going to own him. Brock Thompson, you can pair with Grant Wells as a leverage play. He's their only wide receiver I would look at personally. SMU versus Texas State. This one's very interesting from the SMU side. I have placed bets on SMU full game and in the first half as well. They're one of the best offenses in all of college football, and they're extremely experienced. Shane Buechele is the most expensive quarterback on both sites. I will have ownership in him on both sites. I could see if you wanted to fade him. They did play Texas State last year, and they kind of blew him out. I believe it was 47-17, maybe 47-7. But Buechele didn't do a whole lot. They mostly kept it on the ground game, and it was TJ McDaniel, who as a backup, he was a freshman running back, and as a backup, he had less than 10 carries, and he still went for 150 yards and 3 touchdowns against Texas State from a year ago. So TJ Daniel could blow up, and Shane Buechele could not. But frankly, I've seen it more from Buechele than I have from McDaniel. So I'm going to have more ownership of Buechele. You could create a little bit of a funky lineup and have McDaniel, or you could have both. Frankly, they could score 60 in this game. So I'm going to have a lot of SMU either way. Reggie Roberson is one of the best CFF wide receivers in all of college. At 9,200 is not bad. You could stack him. It's going to be very expensive. But I think if you have the options, there's some good punt plays. You can make it happen. One of those punt plays is Danny Gray. He was just announced today on the depth chart. He's transferred in. He's announced as a starter, and I'm going to have a lot of ownership of him. I was a little bit wary. I know they've been saying some great things in camp. Their coach was saying he might be like the fastest wide receiver he's seen in quite some time. Some quote like that. Some very high praise. They're saying he could be the number 2 guy, maybe even number 1 by season's end. Either way, at 5,000, that's a complete misprice. He's going to be the most popular punt play, but he is for a reason. I see no problem stacking multiple wide receivers with Buechele. Or as a standalone. They're playable either way. You should probably have ownership of SMU in every single one of your lineups. Kylan Granson, I'm not going to have very much of at all, but he is a touchdown guy. He's pretty expensive for a tight end, however. I usually wouldn't look that route. Usually when I'm looking at a tight end, I did play some Kyle Pitts last year because he was just really cheap throughout the whole season, and he was just about on Kylan Granson's level. They were very similar producers. Here, I don't love the price point. I would say it might give you leverage, but it's really tough to gauge at this point, honestly. Rashee Rice will probably give you some leverage, and he could add a stack. I will be very low owned on him. I believe he is cheaper on DraftKings, but he's worth a look there as well. But mainly I'll be looking at Buechele, McDaniel, Roberson, and Gray here. As far as Texas State, I will play probably very little of Texas State, maybe none. Their quarterback, Brady McBride, is a Memphis transfer. And I don't know. I actually thought Texas State had decent talent on the offensive side of the football last year, but their numbers were just god awful. So I don't know. I won't own much. Maybe a Brady McBride share here or there. It's tough to tell who their wide receivers are going to be. They have like 5 of them that I saw the names of, and there's a bunch of transfers coming in. Who knows? Twyford's a guy, a running back. They like to give him a lot of catches as well. I think he's listed as a wide receiver on DraftKings. I could be wrong. So I don't know, maybe in a cash play, but I don't love it. And then Brock Sturgis was announced as their starting running back. He's a transfer, and he's super cheap. So I wouldn't love it, but SMU doesn't have a great defense. So if you want to play one of those guys, they're pretty cheap. I would probably only play one of them, however. So whoever you like is viable. One more thing on why I love SMU this week. Texas State had one of the worst defenses in all of college football last year, and then they're in the 120s this year in returning defensive production. So not only were they terrible last year, they also have brand new guys, so it should be even worse. So I really like SMU to roll here. Arkansas State versus Memphis. This is another one of a great matchup. I'm going to have a lot of ownership on both sides, mostly from the Memphis side. However, from Arkansas State side, Logan Bonner at quarterback, he was announced the starter, but they said he's probably going to be splitting time with Lane Hatcher, so I will not have very much ownership, maybe as a leverage play, but I don't want a quarterback who's splitting time. If he does play the whole game, it's entirely possible. He's one of the better CFF quarterbacks, whoever is at Arkansas State. They love to throw the ball. They were number 7 passing offense last year, so you don't want to completely count them out, but Memphis had a pretty poor rush defense. That was the weakness of their team last year. They did have a strong pass defense, and they were number 20 last year, and TJ Carter at cornerback is one of the best in all college football. That's one reason that's driving down my Bonner ownership. So a lot of people are probably looking at their running backs. Marcel Murray at 8,000. I will have almost no Marcel Murray ownership. Arkansas State really stinks at running the football. Even though they have a fantastic offense and fantastic passing offense, the rushing offense leaves a ton to be desired. So I'm gonna believe it when I see it. Memphis is more talented, so I'm not going to believe in their own game. Arkansas State might be playing from behind as well. However, Jamal Jones was announced as a co-starter, and I just saw Marcel Murray is a little bit banged up. Anytime you see a guy, news come out a couple days before their first game that he's banged up, Marcel Murray might not even play, and if he does, Jamal Jones is getting a decent amount of carry. So if you are higher on Arkansas State rushing offense than I am, Jamal Jones at 6,000 is a pretty good look. Pretty good punt play there. I think there are better punt plays. But I wanted to throw that out there because it's very good pricing on somebody who may be starting. Jonathan Adams Jr. at 7,700. That's a complete mispricing. He's also pretty cheap on DraftKings. I believe he's 6,200, somewhere around that range. He's a top 10 CFF wide receiver. He's around the number 10 ranking. You can get 3 top 10 wide receivers, CFF wide receivers, or at least close to it. I'll say top 15. You can have Coatsy, Roberson, and Adams in the same lineup. These lineups are going to be very stacked. It's going to be very hard to find leverage. I'm going to be very chalky just because that's such a good lineup. It's hard to get away from. But Jonathan Adams is a fantastic look there, even though, like I said, they're playing a good pass defense. It should be a very high-scoring game. Dahu Green at 5,500 on FanDuel. That's a fantastic punt play. He transferred in from Oklahoma, and like I said, this is a high-volume passing offense. Brandon Bowling is another guy. He's pretty cheap. I would personally prefer Green. I think he's a better receiver, and he's cheaper. These guys' prices are flipped in DraftKings. Bowling is very cheap at 3,700, so he might be a decent punt play in DraftKings. As far as with Memphis, I'm going to have a ton of Brady White ownership. He's a very good quarterback. It seems like he's been in college for 8 years. All he does is produce. All he does is throw touchdowns. He's got a little bit of mobility as well. And he's going to be throwing a Coatsy. So I really love pairing those two guys. Coatsy, another guy who seems like he's been catching 10 touchdowns for years and years and years. He's a big body. I think he's 6'3". He's probably going to be in the NFL. So getting him against the Arkansas State, they had a cupcake defense last year, man. They love to get in shootouts. So I love those two. As far as running back, Kenneth Gainwell announced he was sitting out this week. Pretty late notice. So Rodriguez Clark is listed as the starter, and he's pretty cheap at 8,200. This Memphis rushing attack, one of the best rushing attacks in all of college football, year in and year out. So that's definitely worth a look. He'll probably be chalky, but he's very good. Asa Martin at 8,200. He's cheaper on DraftKings at 4,000 as well. I would take a look at Asa Martin. I think Clark's going to be super high owned. I am higher on Clark in general. He is a core play, but Asa Martin might give you a little bit of leverage. And there's always 2 fantasy relevant running backs anyway at Memphis, and they aren't always playing cupcake defense Arkansas State every week. So Asa Martin's worth a look at as well. I don't love the Memphis secondary receiving options because it's very hard to tell who's going to be catching passes. Pop Williams is away from the team for personal reasons, but Calvin Austin, if you want to create some leverage and maybe a larger stack, is not a bad look as well. Looks like that's all I had. That's my breakdown. I had the core plays in bold. Again, next week I'll have a better spreadsheet to go off of that has the DraftKings and FanDuel prices, but it came up so quick on me and I'm going out of town very soon, so I wanted to get this out. But anyway, let me know if you have any questions. I'll be posting this on YouTube and on Twitter. Usually I go live on Sportscaster, but I was not able to do that just with a short notice. But let me know what you guys think. I'll try to be doing this every week. I'm doing some work for The Breakdown. That's thebreakdownsports.com. On Twitter, I'm at YonkersCFB. I'm usually going over college football action. There's a lot of sports going on. The Breakdown, that whole team's covering it down. We have NBA, we have NHL, playoffs for both. We have baseball in the swing of things. We have UFC. I've been covering UFC. I've been crushing the bets. I've been doing some bets on there. And I've been doing fantastic. I was on an 8-0 run, and then I didn't do so hot Tuesday. I think I'm at 8-2 run now. So, but yeah, usually I'll cover UFC as well. Probably not this week since, like I said, I'm going out of town and college football's back. That's my love, my first love. Well, not quite my only love, but number one in my heart. But yeah, that's it for today, folks. So thanks for giving it a listen. And college football's back, man. Crack a beer. It's a great day. Great day to be alive. College football's back. So, all right. See you guys next week.